Seraphina thought the hardest day of her life was burying her grandmother. She was wrong. The hardest day came 3 weeks later, sitting in a lawyer's office, listening to her own parents explain, with calm and steady voices, why she didn't deserve a single dollar of the $340,000 her grandmother had left specifically for her. "You're 35 and still single," her mother said, like that was a crime. "What would you even do with that kind of money?" Seraphina sat there, quiet. Hands folded, eyes dry, because here's what her parents didn't know, what nobody in that room knew. Seraphina had already made 3 phone calls that morning. She had already set something in motion that could not be stopped. Her parents thought they were dealing with the same quiet, obedient daughter they had controlled her entire life. They had no idea who was sitting across from them. And in exactly 3 hours, they would find out. Before I take you into Seraphina's story, I need you to do one thing. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you most, hit that subscribe button right now. Because of this story, it was made for you, and you don't want to miss a single second of what happens next. My name is Seraphina. I was 34 years old, living in Houston, Texas, and from the outside, my life looked completely fine. Good job, my own apartment, a small circle of people I trusted. But if I am being honest, there was only one person in this world who made me feel truly seen, and that was my grandmother, Rose. She wasn't just family. She was home. Every Sunday I drove to her house on Elm Street, and the moment I walked through that door, every heavy thing I carried during the week just melted. Rose had that kind of power. She saw me, not my relationship status, not my age, just me. My parents were not cruel people. I want to be fair about that, but they had a way of making me feel like I was always one step behind where I should be. My brother Marcus got married at 28. Big wedding, big house, 3 kids. And every holiday, every family dinner, every casual conversation somehow looped back to me. "Seraphina, when are you settling down?" I smiled every time, I laughed it off. I kept the peace because that is what I had always done. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the daughter who never caused problems. I thought that counted for something. I really did. I was wrong about that, too. When Rose's health started slipping, I didn't think twice. I reduced my work hours, drove to her house 4 days a week, managed her medications, cooked her meals, sat with her through the long nights when the pain made sleep impossible. My parents visited occasionally, holidays, birthdays, the kind of visits you schedule rather than feel. But I was there. Every single week without fail, without complaint. Rose used to hold my hand and say, "Seraphina, you have the most generous heart of anyone I have ever known." I never thought of it as a sacrifice. I thought of it as love, pure, unconditional love. The kind I had always given freely, maybe too freely. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, Rose asked me to sit beside her on the porch. The Houston sun was low, soft orange light falling across her hands. She looked at me for a long moment before she spoke. "I have taken care of you," she said simply. "Whatever happens, you will be all right." I didn't ask what she meant. I held her hand and told her not to worry about anything. But something in her eyes that day stayed with me, a deep, settled peace mixed with something that looked almost like relief. Like she had finished something important, like she had protected something she needed to protect. I didn't fully understand it then. I would soon enough. About 2 months before Rose passed, something shifted in my parents. The casual visits became frequent. My father started asking Rose questions about her accounts, her paperwork, her arrangements. My mother began offering to help manage her finances, something she had never once offered before. I noticed it. I filed it quietly in the back of my mind but told myself I was being unfair. These were her children. Of course they were involved. Of course they cared, but Rose noticed too. One evening she pulled me aside and said, "Your father asked me again today about the documents." She said it calmly, but her eyes said something else entirely, something that made my stomach drop. Rose passed on a Thursday morning in late October. Peaceful, the nurse told me, in her sleep. I had been there the night before, sitting beside her until she drifted off. I drove home at midnight. By 6 in the morning, she was gone. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time after the call. I didn't cry immediately. I just sat there, completely still, feeling the world rearrange itself into something unfamiliar and cold. Rose was the one person who loved me without condition or agenda. And now that quiet, steady love was gone. I didn't know yet how much I would need her strength in the weeks ahead. I didn't know the worst was still coming. 3 weeks after Rose's funeral, the family gathered at the law office of her estate attorney downtown. I wore the navy dress Rose always said looked beautiful on me. I walked in expecting grief, maybe some logistical tension, but mostly closure. A final act of love from a woman who had spent her whole life giving. My parents were already seated when I arrived. My father adjusted his tie. My mother folded her hands neatly on the table. They looked composed, prepared. I remember thinking they seemed less like grieving children and more like people waiting for a meeting they had already planned. I pushed the thought away, sat down, took a breath, and waited for the attorney to begin. The attorney opened the file slowly, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. Rose had been clear, precise, and deliberate in every word. Personal belongings divided equally among family. The house to be sold, proceeds split. And then, the moment that changed everything. The sum of $340,000 held in Rose's private investment account is to be transferred in full to her granddaughter, Seraphina. My name, clear as daylight. I felt warmth rise in my chest, not greed, but gratitude. Rose had meant what she said on that porch. She had taken care of me. I looked up, eyes soft. And that is when I saw my father's jaw tighten. Before the attorney could finish his sentence, my father raised his hand. Calm, controlled, like he had rehearsed this exact moment. "We have some concerns about the validity of certain provisions," he said. My mother nodded beside him, eyes fixed forward. Their attorney, a man I had never seen before, slid a folder across the table. My stomach dropped. They had brought their own attorney. To my grandmother's will reading. That folder had not been prepared overnight. It had been prepared weeks ago, maybe months. The room shifted, the air changed. I looked at my parents, and for the first time in my life, I did not see family sitting across from me. I saw strangers. After the meeting, my father asked me to sit with them in a private room down the hall. He closed the door gently, that careful, deliberate gentleness that always meant something serious was coming. He sat across from me, hands clasped, voice even. "The money has been redirected, Seraphina. It will be managed under a family trust for the benefit of everyone." He said it like he was doing me a favor, like this was reasonable, like $340,000 with my name attached to it had simply been reorganized for convenience. I stared at him. I waited for something, guilt, hesitation, even a flicker of discomfort. There was nothing, just that calm, practiced expression, completely rehearsed, completely cold. Then my mother spoke. She reached across and touched my hand, and I will never forget how that touch felt. Soft on the surface, empty underneath. "Seraphina, you're 35 and single. You don't have a family to provide for. We do. Marcus has children. There are real responsibilities here that you simply don't have." She smiled when she said it, like it was logical. Like my life, my years of caregiving, my love for Rose had all just been quietly measured and found insufficient. I pulled my hand back slowly. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I just looked at her and felt something inside me go completely, dangerously still. That stillness, they should have been afraid of it. That evening I sat with the copies of the documents their attorney had presented. I read every page twice, then a third time, and slowly the picture became horrifyingly clear. These documents hadn't been filed after Rose passed. The dates showed they had been prepared and signed during Rose's final months, the exact same months my parents had suddenly started visiting more, asking questions, hovering around her paperwork. While I was cooking her meals and sitting with her through painful nights, they were quietly, methodically building a legal barrier around her money. They had used her fragile final months to construct this. They had planned it while she was still breathing. My hands were trembling, not from sadness, from fury. I drove home alone. I didn't turn on music. I didn't call anyone. I walked into my apartment, sat on the couch, and stayed there in the dark for a very long time. Grief and rage are a terrible combination. One pulls you under, the other sets you on fire. I kept hearing my mother's voice. 35 and single. Like those words were the full measure of my worth. Like everything I had given, every hour, every sacrifice, every quiet act of love had been tallied up and dismissed because I didn't have a husband and children to show for it. I thought about Rose. I thought about that porch. I thought about her eyes. And I made a decision. I called Maya just after midnight. She answered on the second ring because that is who Maya is. I told her everything. Every detail, every document, every word my mother had said. When I finished, the line was quiet for a moment. Then Maya said, "Seraphina, what do you want to do?" And I heard myself say it out loud for the very first time, calm, clear, and cert. "They planned this, every step of it, and I'm going to prove it." Saying it out loud made it real, made it solid. I wasn't the grieving granddaughter anymore. I wasn't the quiet, obedient daughter. Something had shifted completely. The fight had officially begun. Monday morning, I walked into the office of Estate Attorney David Callahan, recommended by Maya, sharp as a blade, and exactly what I needed. I laid every document on his desk. He read in silence for 20 minutes. When he finally looked up, he didn't sugarcoat a single word. "Your parents exploited a legal window," he said, "but it wasn't airtight. There are grounds to challenge this, strong grounds." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. He explained the process, methodical, detailed, honest about the difficulty ahead. I listened to every word. I wasn't looking for anything easy. I was looking for a possibility, and it was possible enough. David immediately filed requests for Rose's complete medical and financial records covering her final 8 months. I went home and waited. 4 days later, the first envelope arrived. I sat at my kitchen table, opened it carefully, and began reading. Page after page of account statements, doctor visits, medication logs. Most of it was expected. but then, buried deep inside a stack of financial summaries, a series of entries that made my breath catch completely. Transactions I had never seen, movements of money I had never been told about, small enough individually to seem unremarkable, large enough together to tell a very different story. I marked every single one with a red pen. My hand never shook once. David obtained the detailed bank records, and what they revealed was staggering. Over a 7-month period, while Rose's health was declining, and I was her primary caretaker, $47,000 had been quietly moved out of her personal savings in incremental transfers. Some went into a joint account my father had opened with Rose, an account I never knew existed. Others were transferred under descriptions that meant nothing on the surface but everything in context. David spread the records across his desk and looked at me steadily. "This establishes a pattern," he said. "Your parents weren't just redirecting the inheritance after her death. They were already moving pieces long before she passed." The room felt very small suddenly. David tracked down Patricia, the private nurse who had cared for Rose during her final months alongside me. She agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon. She was warm, careful with her words, but absolutely clear in her memory. She remembered my parents' visits becoming more frequent. She remembered my father arriving one afternoon with documents, asking Rose to sign while Patricia was briefly out of the room. She remembered coming back to find Rose looking unsettled and quiet. "I asked her if she was all right," Patricia said softly. "She said yes, but she didn't look like herself." Patricia agreed to provide a formal statement. I thanked her and held it together until I reached my car. Rose had given me a small key years ago, pressed into my palm one Christmas morning with nothing more than a quiet smile and the words, "Keep this safe, sweetheart." I had kept it in a small jewelry box for 3 years, never fully understanding its purpose. After Patricia's testimony, something told me the time had come. I went to Rose's bank, presented the key and my identification, and was escorted to the vault. Inside the safe deposit box was a sealed envelope, cream-colored, Rose's handwriting on the front, just my name, Seraphina, one word, written with such care it looked like she had taken her time with every single letter. My hands were steady, my heart was not. I drove home before opening it. I needed to be alone, completely alone. I sat by the window, afternoon light falling across the page, and I read Rose's letter. She had written it 8 months before she passed. She wrote that she had seen the way my parents watched her finances. She wrote that she had noticed the questions, the documents, the careful orchestration happening around her. She wrote that she had made sure, through David's predecessor, that her wishes were documented beyond dispute. And then she wrote something that broke me open completely. "Seraphina, if you're reading this, then they tried. And I need you to know I already fought back for you. Now you finish it." I read it 4 times, then I stood up. David read Rose's letter and went completely still. Then he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him before, something beyond professional respect. "This changes everything," he said quietly. Rose's letter, combined with Patricia's statement, the bank records, and the suspicious document timeline, built a case that was no longer just challenging. It was formidable. David filed the formal legal challenge that same afternoon. The filing cited undue influence, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and fraudulent misrepresentation of estate documents. When the courthouse accepted the filing and stamped it official, I stood outside on the steps in the cool Houston air and breathed deeply. The quiet storm had officially made landfall. My parents were served their legal papers on a Wednesday morning. I know because David called me at 10:47 a.m. and said simply, "It's done." I imagined the moment, the knock at their door, the envelope, my father's face as he read my name on the filing. The daughter they had dismissed. The daughter they had called 35 and single like it was a verdict. Coming back, not with tears, not with begging, but with a court filing, evidence, and an attorney who believed every word. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I just sat quietly with my coffee and thought about Rose. And I whispered, "I heard you, Grandma." My father called 40 minutes after being served. I let it ring. He called again and again. On the fourth call I answered. He didn't shout immediately. He started low, controlled, that familiar voice he used when he wanted to remind me who was in charge. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life, Seraphina." Then the control cracked. His voice rose. Words like ungrateful, embarrassing, destroying this family poured through the phone. I held it calmly away from my ear and let him finish. When the silence came, I said, "Dad, anything further needs to go through my attorney." Then I hung up. My heart was pounding, but my voice had not wavered once. Within days, the calls started coming from everywhere. Aunts, cousins, my brother Marcus, who said nothing during the will reading, suddenly had very strong opinions. "Seraphina, you're tearing this family apart over money." Each call carried the same script, the same pressure, the same gentle suggestion that I was the problem, that I was selfish. That Rose would not have wanted this. I listened to each one. I did not argue. I did not explain myself. I had learned something important: people who benefit from your silence will always frame your courage as cruelty. I saved every voicemail, forwarded them all to David, because pressure applied against a legal case is still evidence. Every single call. My parents retained one of Houston's most aggressive estate litigation attorneys, a man named Gerald Frost, whose reputation I Googled that same evening. He was expensive, experienced, and known for dismantling cases exactly like mine. Within 2 weeks, they counter-filed, challenging Rose's original will entirely, arguing she lacked full mental capacity during its creation. My stomach tightened when David told me. This was no longer just about redirecting money. They were going after Rose's legacy directly. They were willing to drag their own mother's memory through a courtroom to protect what they had taken. David looked at me steadily across his desk. They just made a significant mistake, he said. Rose's medical records tell a very different story. The deposition was held on a gray Tuesday morning in a downtown conference room. Gerald Frost sat across from me with his yellow legal pad and his carefully constructed questions, each one designed to make me seem unstable, motivated by greed, or simply confused about Rose's true intentions. I had prepared for 3 weeks. David and I had gone through every possible angle, every pressure point, every trap. When Frost asked his questions, I answered cleanly, precisely, without emotion, and without hesitation. I referenced dates, documents, and specific conversations with complete accuracy. Halfway through, I watched Frost glance at his notes more frequently. His rhythm slowed slightly. By the end, the confidence he had walked in with looked considerably less certain. Patricia was composed and unshakable on the stand. She described Rose's final months with quiet precision, her mental sharpness, her humor, her clarity of thought, even as her body weakened. She described my parents' increasing visits, the documents brought without prior notice, the afternoon she returned to find Rose unsettled and withdrawn. Gerald Frost cross-examined her aggressively, suggesting memory gaps, questioning her professional objectivity. Patricia answered every question without flinching. When Frost suggested she might be mistaken about the signing incident, she looked at him calmly and said, "I have been a private nurse for 22 years. I know the difference between a patient who signs willingly and one who signs because they feel they have no choice." The room went very quiet. David requested permission to enter Rose's personal letter into evidence. Gerald Frost objected immediately, arguing authenticity, arguing relevance, arguing everything his expensive legal mind could construct. The judge overruled every objection. The letter was authenticated through handwriting analysis and cross-referenced with Rose's documented signature from that same period. When the court clerk began reading Rose's words aloud, her awareness of the manipulation, her deliberate steps to protect Seraphina, her final instruction to finish it, the courtroom fell into complete silence. I did not look at my parents, but Maya, sitting 2 rows behind me, told me afterward that my mother had pressed her fingers to her mouth. And my father had stared at the table and not moved once. The ruling came on a Friday morning. David called me before I had even finished my coffee. His voice was calm, but I could hear something underneath it, the quiet satisfaction of a man who had fought hard and won cleanly. The judge had reviewed every document, every testimony, every piece of evidence we had built over months of careful, relentless work. The conclusion was unambiguous. The documents my parents had presented were declared legally invalid, obtained through undue influence over a vulnerable adult. The counterfiling attacking Rose's mental capacity was dismissed entirely. Every argument Gerald Frost had constructed, every pressure tactic, every expensive legal maneuver, collapsed completely. Justice had a timestamp. Friday morning, 9:23 a.m. David filed the enforcement order the same afternoon. Within 72 hours, the full $340,000, every single dollar Rose had intentionally, lovingly, and deliberately set aside for me, was released and transferred into my account. I sat at my kitchen table when the notification came through. I stared at the number on my screen for a long time. This wasn't just money. It was Rose's voice coming through one final time, clear, firm, and completely undefeated. It was 3 years of Sunday drives to Elm Street. It was every medication sorted, every meal cooked, every sleepless night beside her bed. It was proof that love, when it is real, finds a way to protect itself even from the grave. The judge's ruling didn't simply close the case, it opened a new door entirely. Based on the evidence presented, specifically the unauthorized transfers from Rose's account during her final months, the court referred the matter to the Texas Attorney General's office for a formal financial exploitation investigation. David explained it to me carefully. This was no longer civil. This had crossed into potential criminal territory. My parents, who had walked into that law office months ago with polished documents and practiced confidence, were now the subjects of a state investigation. The same meticulous records I had gathered, the same bank statements marked in red pen at my kitchen table, were now in the hands of investigators. The consequences were only beginning. After the ruling, my phone went quiet. The aunts who had called urging me to drop the case, silent. The cousins who had whispered about my selfishness, silent. Marcus, who had delivered his speech about family unity from the comfort of the life my parents had always prioritized over mine, sent one text. 3 words. I am sorry. I read it once and put my phone face down. Sorry is not a reckoning. Sorry is what people say when the consequences arrive, and they need to reposition themselves on the right side of history. Not one of them had stood beside me during the fight. Their silence now told me everything their words never honestly had. The morning after the ruling, I drove to Rose's old neighborhood. I parked outside the house on Elm Street, sold now, someone else's curtains in the windows, and I sat there for a while. I thought about every Sunday, every cup of tea, every conversation on that porch where Rose made me feel like the most valuable person in any room. I had spent my entire life being measured against a standard. I never agreed to marriage, children, conventional milestones. And I had spent the last several months proving that quiet strength, patience, and preparation are more powerful than any of it. I started the car, pulled away from Elm Street, and I felt, for the first time in years, genuinely, completely free. 3 months after the ruling, I established the Rose Aliner Foundation, a small nonprofit based in Houston providing financial literacy resources and legal aid referrals to women navigating estate disputes and financial exploitation. The first event was held on a Tuesday evening in a community center downtown. 14 women came. Some were dealing with family betrayal. Some were fighting for inheritances that had been quietly redirected. Some had simply never been told they had legal options. I stood in front of them and told them Rose's story and mine. After the event, an elderly woman took my hand and said, "Your grandmother must have been something special." I smiled and said, "She still is. So here is what I want you to hear directly from me." They called me 35 and single like it was the end of the sentence. Like those words were enough to define my worth, invalidate my grief, and justify taking everything Rose had worked to give me. But here is what they never understood. Being alone doesn't make you weak. Being quiet doesn't mean you're defeated. And the woman who has nothing left to lose, who has already survived the silence, the dismissal, and the grief, is the most dangerous person in any room. Rose knew that. She built her letter around that truth. So if someone in your life is betting on your silence right now, let them keep betting. Then show them exactly who they underestimated.